Today, our peaceful climate bathes fertile lands in warm weather, allowing civilization to flourish. But it hasn't always been like that. The Earth follows a cycle of freezing ice ages, followed by warmer interglacial periods. Recent centuries have been kind to humankind. The last 10,000 years have seen just one major cooling. But this could all change. Some scientists now suspect that the stable climate of the past was not so stable after all. They believe the Earth can suddenly plunge into micro-ice ages, or giant freezes, lasting as long as 1,000 years, with devastating blizzards crippling our cities and destroying crops. Terrifyingly, this new freezing climate could hit us far sooner than we think, with little or no warning. This may sound like scaremongering, but the people of Montreal have already had a tiny taste of just how deadly a giant freeze can be. January 5th, 1998. Temperatures suddenly drop to 15 degrees, and a violent ice storm strikes, coating the city in freezing rain. This thriving metropolis becomes a frozen, barren wasteland. Living through this icy disaster is journalist Alan Hustak. Hustak returns home from work as a power outage strikes the city, something all too familiar to the residents of snowy Montreal.
The first evening was kind of like a carnival. You lit the fireplace and lit the candles and knew that tomorrow everything will get back to normal, and then of course tomorrow it didn't.
It's very far from normal, and getting far worse. Over the next 5 days, a massive storm dumps 4 inches of freezing rain on Montreal. It falls as water, but freezes on impact to build up layers of solid ice. Its weight crumples electrical towers. The city buckles. Up to 1.4 million homes have no power. The ice storm exposes the Achilles heel of modern cities, our total reliance on technology.
We are so used in a large North American city of 3.5 million to having your television, having your microwave, having your computers, and it was gone in an instant. It was gone in an instant.
Today's dependence on electricity makes us even more vulnerable to climate change than were our ancestors of hundreds of years ago.
Try it yourself. Shut the power off in your house and try and function without any of the things that you take for granted.
Hustak City becomes unrecognizable.
This street was absolutely a glistening landscape of ice. The streets were caked with ice, the building was caked in ice, the roofs were caked in ice, the green mansard roof was all caked in ice. It looked like a giant wedding cake, and the monument over here to Lord Nelson was like a giant popsicle in the middle of the square.
However, amid all the destruction, Hustak holds an ace up his sleeve. His apartment has a wood-burning fireplace that's unaffected by the power cuts. But after 4 days of constant use, he runs out of wood.
You couldn't buy wood, and we had nothing to burn. So I had to go back to my apartment, and we burned the legs of the dining room table to keep warm that night. And of course, it's at this point where you begin to wonder how much longer you're going to be able to continue.
It's 5 icy days and freezing nights before power finally returns to Montreal. The damage totals more than $2.5 billion. 30 people die. It destroys over 3,000 electricity towers and all but one line or grid feeding the city. Hustak believes the situation could have been a lot worse.
We were left with one grid, and had that grid gone down, I mean, the city would have had to have been evacuated because we would have been without electricity for 2 or 3 months.
It's a scary lesson for everyone living in a modern city, thinking ourselves safe in the warmth of our homes. The ice storm that made Montreal citizens burn their furniture just to stay alive lasts barely a week. Imagine what would happen in a giant freeze, one that lasts for years. Picture your own city covered in ice, not just for days, but for weeks, maybe months, or even a lifetime. Is this a true vision of the future? Scientists are piecing together a clearer picture of how our climate has behaved over the last 160,000 years. And it's not a comforting image. To understand what might cause a big freeze, we must look at the bigger picture and discover what drives our planet in and out of ice ages over millions and millions of years. Normally, our planet swings rhythmically between cold ice ages and warmer periods that scientists call interglacials. It's the Earth's rotation around the Sun that causes these swings in and out of ice ages. Earth's orbit is far from simple. It varies in a number of complex ways, most importantly, in the shape of the orbit. It's not always a perfect circle. Through a cycle lasting about 100,000 years, the orbit goes from being almost round to being stretched into an oval shape and back to almost round again. In the more elliptical orbit, we travel 3 million miles further away from the Sun. Less sunlight reaches the Earth, and an ice age is born. But this vast astronomical cycle causes large temperature swings that are slow and predictable. Today we live in a warm interglacial period. Eventually, Earth's orbit will alter once again, and a new ice age will freeze us, but not for another 10 to 20,000 years. But if you think you're safe from the cold, think again. New research suggests that our climate is far less predictable and far more unstable than we ever thought possible. This new vision was revealed by geologist Richard Alley.
The climate sometimes jumps out and surprises us. Sometimes it tips over, sometimes it flips a switch, and it's not always nice and smooth and easy to predict.
Alley's passion is frozen H2O. He is one of the world's leading experts on ice. He studies the climate by collecting deep samples of ice, called ice cores. Ice stores a treasure trove of data about the climate of centuries past. Every year as snow falls, it forms a layer of ice on the surface of ice sheets and glaciers. Each annual layer of ice remains on the surface until it is covered up by the following year's snowfall. Over thousands of years, these layers build up one on top of the other. The deeper the layer, the older the ice. To access this ancient ice, scientists send a hollow drill deep into its frozen heart to pull out a solid column, an ice core. Drilling deeper and deeper into the ice exposes layers that first fell as snow thousands of years ago. The ice and chemicals it traps have remained untouched ever since. Studying ice cores is a little like having a time machine. By comparing the thickness of each layer, Alley deduces what happened to the climate year by year. He made his most amazing discovery in Greenland when he drilled out a 2-mile deep ice core.
We took 2-mile-long ice cores, and we got over 100,000 years of the history of the climate, and it was phenomenal.
The ice history uncovered by Alley reveals that the major climatic swings between warm interglacial periods and ice ages are only part of the story.
The climate usually sort of changes nicely and smoothly and gradually, and sometimes it just changes. And years, a single year, there's huge climate changes.
These huge and sudden swings tear apart previously held beliefs that our climate is in any way predictable.
We stood there in a snow trench in Greenland and looked at this record coming out of the ice cores, and the world changed. And that was just phenomenal, just extraordinary discovery.
The evidence shows our climate swinging wildly between extremes, with changes happening not only within the ice ages, but also within the interglacial periods scientists once thought were stable. The bad news is, these swings are big, really big. They can last over 1,000 years. Even worse, they act rapidly, striking and totally changing our climate within a decade.
The size of many of them was sort of half the distance between an ice age and today. In central Greenland, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, 20-some degrees Fahrenheit for the biggest ones. So these are big changes in something like 10 years.
Ali's research shows that the climate can change suddenly and in a very short time. The warm existence enjoyed by most of us in the world could disappear should our weather turn hostile. But even more worryingly, this crazily swinging climate appears to be a normal state of affairs. It is the boring, stable weather that we've enjoyed for the past 10,000 years that is, in fact, a freak of nature.
We've seen this history of boing, 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 boring. And that boing, boing, boing sort of looks like what's normal, that we should be used to crazy climates, and this boring that we have is sort of as good as it gets.
If Ali is right, another big freeze could be on the way. A freeze that could cripple our cities, destroy our crops, and change the socio-political face of the planet. But how and when might it strike? Scientists are racing to some of the most extreme places on Earth to identify what it is that causes such dramatic climate change. In a supreme irony, it appears that it may be triggered not by cold, but by a combination of fire, brimstone, and extreme heat. The Earth is currently enjoying a period of warm, stable climate. But it hasn't always been this way. Scientists are discovering that the Earth's true climate swings rapidly between warm spells and freezes. And these swings can be sudden and devastating. Scientists have been trying to discover what causes these sudden